Hello, everyone. Welcome to monthly research briefing with Capital Institutional Services. We're excited to have everyone here today. I'm Ed O'Dowd of CAPIS, and this is part of a series we do every month with independent research content. Today, we're excited to have a little bit departure from last month. We had an equity strategist, U.S. equity strategist on. This month, we're going to turn it over and get back to politics a little bit, talk about macroeconomics, look at public policy, look at what's going on politically and how that's affecting our investment landscape. So we're excited. We have Brendan Walsh of Markets Policy Partners joining us today. Anyone that's joined the call with us over the last few years who knows Brendan and knows his partner, John Fagan, of their firm. They look at Markets Policy Partners, looking at macroeconomics, public policy, the political landscape. And then we're also excited to have Ed Hill of FTP Partners join us. Ed has joined us in the past about a year ago, and works with a lobbyist firm, FTP Partners in DC, helps clients navigate issues with Congress, financial regulators. So we're excited to have Ed back on and give his perspective, particularly with what's going on, on the political landscape with obviously the war in Iran, midterms down the line. So we're excited to have Ed's intake on this, his input on this. So welcome, gentlemen. Brendan, great to see you again.
You too. Happy
All right.
summer. It's always good to see everybody.
Yeah. Ed, thank you for joining us.
Let's do it. Good to see you, Ed.
Uh, so I figured we'd kind of kick off with the Fed, especially with the Humphrey Hawkins that just started, and then we can talk regulation, legislation. We'll talk a little Iran, and kind of finish with maybe talking some midterm elections. But on the Fed, obviously we have a new chair. The Humphrey Hawkins testimony, if you're the Fed chair, the goal is to say as little market moving things as possible. I think he kind of passed that test. The big probably data point for the Fed this week was the PCE price index, which is what they target. About 80% of that comes from the CPI and the PPI, which we got yesterday. So people can do the calculations, and it looks like both those were lower than expected. So the June PCE should be in the zero point 0.2 range, which is good news for the Fed because oil prices obviously have gone up a lot with the war, but that's not really what concerned a lot of the Fed board. It was more the sticky core prices. So to have a good data point in the zero point 0.2 range, I think is a good sign. And our kind of view is when you balance the inflation situation, which obviously concerning, War stated, it's our goal to get inflation under control. The Fed's fought, since the Arthur Burns time to regain their credibility on the Fed on the inflation front. So, they're taking that seriously. But on the flip side, Warsh has a president that wants you to cut rates. And actually, in a number of interviews, President Trump has been, I suppose, much more balanced than some people would have thought on that. He's like, I trust Warsh. I want him to cut, but he's got a board. So when we look at the balance of politics and economics, some might fight for a hike here in the next couple of meetings. Some are probably fighting, for a cut. So I think the reality is we're probably just on hold for a good deal of this year, unless something massively changes. And I think that the political part of that plays a role in it. The other part that shapes our view on that is, Warsh is kind of reinventing what the Fed is doing and how they do it. He wants them to talk less. Which you can control some people, but every regional Fed president, I don't think you're allowed to dictate their schedule. But he's created a number of committees, for research and things like that. And they're forming these, and they're going to do a bunch of research, and they're coming back, in I don't know 3, 4, 6 months with conclusions. So it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to decide, all right, we're going to really rely on these committees to help guide us and then make a massive policy change. So I think, our view for at least the next few meetings is we're on hold. And there also is a huge amount of politics. Lisa Cook's seat is still being litigated. So I'll kind of throw that over to Ed to kind of talk about both the political side of the Fed, but also, we forget that the Fed has two jobs. They do monetary policy, but they're also our biggest, financial regulator. And Ed's very much in the weeds on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Lisa Cook thing is partially resolved, right? I mean, it's, it's, doesn't look like she's going to be fired anytime soon, but the Supreme Court decision, although leaned in favor of Fed independence, did leave some wiggle room. So, who knows? But for now, it kind of looks like the Fed board is established as it is. Brendan talked obviously about the committees. Those I find really interesting. I find particularly interesting the people he put on those committees, pretty serious people, business leaders, global central bankers, academics, not all, um, conservative leaning, although perhaps many of them are, but you have like a Jeremy Stein and others. So on there that are kind of center left. So, I think it's a really serious effort to
Yeah,
completely
you didn't get
re
on this committee by making a political donation. You got on by your career, work.
right. Like I find Mark Andreessen on, I think it was the productivity committee to be pretty interesting, right? Obviously, Warsh has talked a lot about AI, and having, Mark Andreessen there, I think is super interesting. But yeah, so I think the Fed could be in, so I don't want to use the word radical because that sort of implies, that may have negative connotations, but substantive changes to the way the Fed operates around everything from both its, forward guidance and models to communications to, the way they view productivity. It could be a pretty, it's a soup to nuts reevaluation of the Fed. And Warsh used, I forget the exact words he used in his testimony before the House yesterday, but it did imply that I think he used a word, it wasn't radical again, but it was something like that. That it is, this is not going to be a continuation of the Powell Fed. Um, I don't know, Brendan, Ed, did you want me to get in some of the other things we're watching here? Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, let's go with that now. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
on the fiscal side, the House is today taking steps towards a reconciliation 3.0 bill. Remember, reconciliation is a procedure really designed for the Senate, where you can pass certain fiscal bills with a 50 plus one majority instead of the usual 60 vote majority. It's historically been somewhat unusual to use this for appropriations bills. But given the partisanship in Washington, the House is doing just that. So they have a bill that the House Budget Committee is set to begin debate on today. That includes roughly $100 billion in spending, a lot of it to the Defense Department. Um, as we sit here, and I think the markup started about an hour ago. I think they may have suspended it just before I walked in here. They're having challenges with it. Some conservatives. There's also some money for farmers, originally slated at 10 billion, talking about going 20 billion. It's kind of funny, I would say, is that many of the same members are saying we need to, that money is not offset in this bill, so it would be 10 billion. Many of the conservative members are saying we need to offset it. And by the way, 10 billion is not enough. So they simultaneously want to spend more money and
And cut more money. Yeah.
yeah, at the same time. So it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what's going on. The Senate has been a little more um, careful in the way they talk about it, whether they even want to do this and whether they want to take the House approach. But Trump is pretty insistent, and the Defense Department really needs funding because of the both the conflict in Iran, as well as the Venezuela operations, have put a strain on the Pentagon's funding. So that's something to kind of watch. So we look ahead. the Senate isn't even trying to do appropriations bills. Remember, they have, I think it's the 12 or 13 appropriations bills they have to do every year. They're not going to consider any of them before September 30th, really meaning that the only viable option is a continuing resolution, perhaps likely until after the November elections. At this point, everyone's watching to see whether Democrats will support this or not. Again, you need 60 votes. Right now it's 53-47, but not every Republican is a reliable vote, notably Rand Paul, although John Fetterman on the Democratic side has been willing to vote with Republicans on some things. So still, either way, you're 7, 8, whatever the number is, vote short. Um, um,
What
right
about the
now, I think
timing of Lindsey Graham's sister taking over for him? Is that
she
pretty
she she
quick?
was sworn in yesterday, so
Yeah, yeah,
she's there. So we have a full, well, we don't have a full Senate because Mitch
right.
McConnell's not
Yeah.
back to work. But he says he's coming back. So, we'll see whether those 53 Republican seats are still there come September. I'm presuming that McConnell will be back, but I really have no idea, just sort of based on public reporting. And then I think right now Schumer's inclined to support funding the government and having enough Democrats support it, but I don't know that a final decision has been made. So we're looking at a possible government shutdown at the end of September. I'd put the odds at that is, well below 50-50, but certainly not zero. Let's call it 25-30% for fun. Chance of a government shutdown, but that's really kind of, again, I think the bias right now among most members is to just get through the election and fight this out. If Democrats win one or both chambers, we'll probably have to look for another continuing resolution into the new year. Even if we don't, that may be the outcome. Um, the rest of the agenda for the year in Congress is they want to, the Senate's in for another few weeks. They want to get through some appointments. They're looking to get Jay Clayton confirmed as Director of National Intelligence. That would send Bill Pulte back full time to FHFA for you Fannie and Freddie watchers. Todd Blanche may or may not get confirmed before the end of this congressional session. They got a bunch of judges they want to do. They're hoping to bring up a crypto bill. There's negotiations going on at 2:30 with the president and some Republican senators, and the goal would be to release a draft crypto bill as soon as tomorrow, with the idea of putting it up for a test vote sometime in the session. If they get Jay Clayton confirmed, they'd like to do FISA. Um, there's also a Lindsey Graham legacy bill on Russian sanctions that looks like it may get some bipartisan support. Um, it's a bill he had worked hard on, and I think there's a lot of goodwill to honoring his legacy through tougher Russia sanctions. So I think those are some of the things on the agenda for right now.
When you look at the midterm election, you have any like advice? Presidential election is one thing. There's two people running. This is a lot of different races for different seats across the country. Anything you kind of watch to get a sense of the way things are going, or is it also kind of still too early to get too excited about one way or the other?
I always check the prediction markets and I check all the polling every day. It's funny, the polls are all over the place, right? And the polling gets a lot of criticism, and probably for good reason. But it simply comes down to the variance in polling. And if you look at, like, right now, the polls are like generally the generic ballot test, which is, do you intend to vote for a Democrat or a Republican in the for Congress this year? The generally more than like 5 points, which is probably around the average right now in favor of the Democrats, means you could get some significant changes. But remember, it really, every polling is an art, not a science, and it's built on turnout models. And people don't have a really good sense, I think, of what the electorate will look like. Historically, the president's party loses seats, and right now there's functionally a two-seat majority in the House for the Republicans.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the weight of, and so it's pretty easy to flip. But if you look at some of these independent analysts, they'll tell you there's about 212 safe Republican seats. There's about 207 safe Democratic seats. So we're only talking about, 20 some seats that are real,
Yeah.
that are really in
That's what to
play.
focus on. Right.
And,
Yeah.
and those seats could have their own unique characteristics. Candidate quality matters. Democrats have taken in some cases to lobbying, some far left candidates, Republicans, some far right candidates. And, I don't want to say it's unpredictable, but it is highly variant. There's a great deal of variance. And again, history would suggest Democrats will take the House. The Senate's a little harder. We'll see what happens in Maine. The Democrats don't have a nominee
Yeah.
right
And
now.
Maine's like a perfect example of
Yeah.
this. What's
Yeah.
going on there really is totally unique to Maine and kind of
Yeah.
irrelevant what the president's doing, in your opinion. Yeah.
People are watching Michigan. Democrats don't have their nominee yet. They haven't had their primaries, but it's a kind of more further left candidate against a more establishment candidate. Polls are close. Um, Mike Rogers, the Republican nominee, is a very strong candidate, ran really well 2 years ago. The president won Michigan 2 years ago. So that, I'll call it 50-50, maybe Democrats, maybe 60-40 Democrats, but it depends on their nominee. So those are like two seats that I think Democrats have been counting on, and totally possible none of them could materialize. I was talking to one of our sister firms the other day, run by some high-level it's a Texas firm that we're affiliated with, and they refuse to predict what's going to happen in Texas right now. And people usually consider that a red seat, but Republicans nominated a candidate who's had some ethical problems, and Democrats appear to have a relatively strong candidate. There's some criticisms of him as well, though. So, I think, again, if you ask me to handicap, I'd suggest that Republicans will hold the Senate, even if it's a 50-50 split with the vice president casting tie-breaking votes. So Dems really need to pick up 4 seats, which seems difficult, but not out of the question. So, I think the election's a big question. Consensus is Dems take the House, Republicans take the Senate, but you could see something totally different based on candidate quality and national trends. So um, hard to predict. One thing I would say, if Democrats take the House or the Senate, I think that greatly decreases the chances of having anything resembling a functional Congress. We can debate whether that exists today, but it'll be worse. And
Yeah.
and I really look, the president in his last 2 years has had no compunction of using executive power to do things without Congress. The Supreme Court, in many cases, not every case, has granted him a great deal of authority. There's something called the unitary executive theory that, the president has a great deal of power to run the federal government. Um, and I could see him being super aggressive, just saying like, we're not going to pass legislation on anything meaningful. So let's just look around for what we can do, whether it be around energy, whether it be around pharmaceuticals, whether it be around housing. Um, so, um, but that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have
On
any
the
Do you have any opinion? I know this is way too early, but I'm going
Yeah.
to throw it out there since you're talking about the elections. A way too early look at 28. Is it Vance's historically, if you're a VP in good standing, it's kind of the baton's been handed to you. So does that pretty much guarantee us, not a guarantee, but that it's going to be Vance and not Rubio? And then what about on the Dem side? What do you see now, knowing it's 2.5 years away? Understood.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, so if you look at polling right now on the Republican side, Vance is the clear leader. I don't put a ton of stock in that in the sense that so much of this is about name ID. And despite Rubio's high profile in the administration, Vance is clearly better known. Um, uh, they are very close personal friends. I think there's open question as to whether Rubio would even run against Vance or maybe he'd run on a ticket with Vance. But Rubio's a serious candidate, right? Like I think Vance is probably the favorite, to your point, Ed. But I think maybe if Rubio chooses to get in, I would I would treat him as a very serious candidate. Um, their views are not they apparently are like best friends and inseparable, but their views on things aren't entirely the same. Rubio's still a little more of a traditional Republican, particularly on foreign policy issues, which are under his purview as both National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. Although Vance has obviously taken a leading role in the Iran war. I mean, if that goes badly, that could hurt Vance's chances, right? I mean, he's the one tasked with peace, and right now, as we
Mhm.
sit here today, Brendan and I do a podcast together, and we every joke we're like, no war this week. The next when we do the next week podcast, we're like, we're at war again.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been up and
And
down.
and so like whether that affects Vance's chances, again, even odds give me Vance, give me some odds, and maybe I take Rubio. It's no one else is obvious right now. Some other people who are just tossed around, or people like Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, Glenn Youngkin, who's kind of a traditional Reagan conservative, former governor of Virginia. Um, I'm trying to think of some other names that are out there, but who knows? There'll probably be plenty of candidates to choose from. Um, on the Democratic side, God, it feels wide open. Harris is leading all polls, former Vice President Harris, but I think a lot of that is name ID.
Yeah.
Um, um, the one I'd watch, the energy in the Democratic Party is on the left, right? So I would look at a left, one of the more further left candidates as maybe as underdogs, but worth watching. AOC is the one that's discussed most often. Um, but Newsom feels like he's losing a little traction, but he's clearly a serious candidate. And again, it's a long way to go until 2028, so you can't rule him out. JB Pritzker in Illinois, a more moderate candidate like Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, or Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, are names you hear a lot. Um, um,
The
you
senator
know,
from senator from Georgia is a very good speaker.
John Ossoff is someone who, if you watch the prediction markets, seems to have skyrocketing
Yeah,
chances. I think he's
yeah.
up to about 15%. He has to get through his reelection this year,
Right. He's got to make this through that.
which he's favored right now. Again, having a Republican candidate in Georgia that um, had had some ethics questions raised about him, and Georgia's a purple state, but not a blue state, even though it currently has two um, two Democratic senators. So Ossoff probably wins, but maybe not, right? That probably damages his chances. But yeah, he's worth watching. Andy Beshear from Kentucky, the
Hmm.
moderate governor of Kentucky, his name's been thrown around. I don't feel like these kind of more establishment Democrats right now have the energy of their party, but again, things can change. Um, so someone who's either more closely, more left leaning or even further left leaning than that, like a Harris, like a Newsom, I would say is like a mainstream progressive, or a AOC who's a further left progressive. Those names seem kind of interesting to me. Although again, I maybe it's just me, but I'm somewhat skeptical about Harris. I just think she disappointed a lot of people, and whether they're willing to people are willing to give her a second chance. I don't know, but maybe.
Yeah, I agree. And on the Iran front, I think we're just going to remain in this purgatory Iran's realized that they can shut the strait with some very inexpensive drones. It's also talk that they're sending the Houthis drones to be able to control the strait on the other side of the peninsula. That's not a great development. But on our front, we, we can't back down and things like that. But we're also our ammunitions are at dangerously low levels, and due to the trade war and the restrictions that China has put on us with rare earths and other critical minerals, it's very difficult for the defense industry to quickly restock, what we've dropped. So I think we continue, actually even bigger with the new Japanese Prime Minister. She kind of poked the dragon, and they've completely shut Japan off from, rare earths. And Japan is one of the biggest makers of the magnets that go into all of our defense industry. So the Japanese actually industries that are reliant on that are in a crisis right now. That's actually why John's not with us. He's over there visiting with some companies. I think we continue with these little targeted strikes and things like that while the negotiators continue to negotiate in the background. But I think we are in this range bound area for oil. It'll spike every now and then, and it'll go back down when we back down. But I don't see any, concrete resolution between the two sides anytime soon because I don't think Iran's going to agree to anything, that takes away their uranium. So we'll remain in this kind of purgatory, and but on the flip side, that probably keeps us from doing, anything with Cuba anytime soon.
Yeah. And I wonder if like Iran is thinking, can we keep playing this game for 2.5 years and hopefully just Trump's not there anymore and the next president
Yeah.
make this a priority?
And for Iran, we started it, but so much of their decision making actually really has nothing to do with us. It's with their neighbors, especially Saudi Arabia. So they're not going to give up. The negotiations are not just with us. It's with the entire Middle East, and unfortunately, through this war, Iran realized that it's a lot easier to control the strait than maybe they even realized. So they're not going to give up that power anytime soon.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Good.
yeah, and Ed talked about legislation. We talked about the election. That's kind of the big, three, four things we wanted to hit out. If unless anybody has any questions, we're more
Yeah.
than
And
happy
we
to
can
talk.
put that to the audience. If there's any questions, please go and hit it into the chat or Q&A, and I will read them to either Brendan or Ed as you have them. I don't see that there's much popping on right now. Um, So your thought on interest rates being staying put, I guess, for the time being, and they're doing these research committees you were mentioning, and how that plays.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the market is a little too hawkish in terms of pricing in a couple hikes. I think we're just kind of on hold for a while.
Hmm.
Both, I think it's actually the right decision for the Fed. I do think we're seeing a bit of a more normalization of inflation, but it's going to take a while for the year over year rates to drop. Even a
Right.
point two, if you multiply that by 12, that's 2.4% on core. So to get back to their two is going to take a while, but I don't think they understand that's not going to happen
Hmm.
overnight. But as long as the monthly readings are much more normalized, especially in those sticky services components. I think that's what concerns a lot of the members of the board. That if inflation seeps into services, that's a lot harder to get out rather than high oil feeds into certain things, but if oil's not high anymore, it doesn't have to feed into it anymore.
Yeah,
But
to the extent,
yeah,
but
go.
enough to say, the extent that Bush has control of the FOMC, which he himself has talked about messy meetings and that sort of thing. But to the extent he has control of the board, right? He's doing this huge. He's basically said, like, I don't know that like the way the Fed makes decisions work, right? That's what these five working
Yeah.
groups are about. Why would he start,
Yeah, and he
saying
hasn't
we
been in
should
the
raise
Fed
rates.
in what, 15, 20. He left, during the financial crisis. So that was, '08 or '09, So why would he make any huge decisions when he's kind of saying, like, I'm not sure that we're doing it right?
But again, that doesn't mean he wouldn't support one rate cut or something. I'm just saying,
Yeah,
like, I
yeah,
think there's a bias towards not moving, all things being equal, just from as he thinks about how he wants to run this Fed.
yeah. And the labor market, the last reading wasn't great, but it wasn't a disaster. It was a little troubling that the healthcare sector, didn't add as many jobs as it had, because that's been a huge driver of the overall jobs market. So they're certainly monitoring that, and that would be the wild card. I do think that, if you started to see negative jobs numbers, that flips the whole thing on its head.
Right.
And that's where you get cuts. But I don't see that anytime soon. So I think, really probably for the rest of the year, we're just on hold. And I think that's probably the right decision.
Ned, if we have one more minute,
Yeah.
I just want to briefly touch on the crypto bill. I don't know how much folks on this care about that. I think
Yeah.
that right now it doesn't look good for passing crypto legislation. Again, there's a negotiation later today. There's a few reasons Democrats have some concerns about the bill. A group of law enforcement, one notable law enforcement group, the National Sheriff's Association, has come out against the bill because of a provision called the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act that makes it harder to go after developers of blockchains for money laundering, the people who actually write the code. There's the bigger problem right now is this ethics issue, which is Democrats would like a provision to restrict public office holders, notably the president, from profiting off crypto activities. This announcement 2 weeks ago now that he made almost $2 billion, or his family made almost $2 billion on crypto related activities, certainly didn't help. I don't know that it's meaningful in the short term. So, like I said, they may try and do a test vote. Right now, they don't have the votes to do it. Negotiations are ongoing. But if they can't pass crypto legislation, the SEC and the CFTC will do much of what this bill accomplishes through their existing regulatory authorities. They're ready to go. They're drafting regulations. They've been holding off while Congress tries to figure out what to do with this so-called Clarity Act. The bigger question is not what happens in the short term. The bigger question is what happens in the longer term if we have a change in political control in 2028. If one of those Democratic candidates or another Democratic candidate becomes president, appoints a new SEC, a new CFTC, can they reverse some of that? So, for the next 2 years, I don't know how meaningful passing the Clarity Act will be, but for the longer term outlook, I think the industry would love to see something get done to lock in some of this oversight of the crypto industry and what they view as to be a fair and reasonable regulatory overlay, with the fear that a future Gary Gensler or some other regulator more less open to crypto or more hostile to the crypto industry. So that's what this legislation's about. It's not about what happens in the next 2 years. It's what happens after that.
Okay. Makes sense. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much. Ed, Brendan, we really appreciate your time today and some good insights here in the middle of the summer. And thank you so much for everyone that joined us today. Really appreciate it. Next month, we're going to have Fair Lead Strategies, I think Thursday, August 20th, and she's going to discuss, Katie Stockton will be discussing technical analysis. So it's a different angle at looking at things and how you can navigate the investing markets. But really appreciate the insights of Brendan and Ed today looking at the political landscape. It's a little different angle than we normally discuss. Certainly, Marcus Policy Partners does get into that, but with Ed's experience, it was a little more input on the political side. So it was great. It was a welcome change. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah.
for joining us.
And as always, we're always here, but also, for very specific questions, Ed and the team at FTP Partners are, always available. So reach out to,
Yeah, we cover every segment of the economy, so if it can ever be available, let us know.
Absolutely. As we always say, any clients, prospective clients are on this call, if they ever want a relationship directly or discuss directly with any of our research partners, reach out to us or reach out to them directly. That would be fantastic. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.
good
Bye-bye.
rest of the summer.